Good morning and welcome everybody to this Concise webinar. This one is how to set up goals in Google Analytics. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Richard Keeves and I'd also like you to welcome Gareth Lane. Come on down, Gareth.
That's me, Gareth Lane voice, reporting for duty.
There we go. Okie dokie. So just there's a lot of people here today, some who haven't been to the webinars before. Thank you for coming and thanks for coming back if you have participated in our Concise webinars before. These are meant to be, as the screen shows there, 100% educational. We try not to waffle. We don't have sales pitches, although sometimes we do mention a few things. And this is really about putting information together that is going to be useful to help people like yourselves get better results from online business. So now I'm going to hand over to Gareth. Gareth's actually running this session today primarily, and take it away, Gareth.
Alrighty, so just with Google Analytics, stats package for anyone that doesn't know, that is installed on your website. If you haven't got a Google Analytics, this webinar is probably going to be a waste of time. However, I would strongly suggest you go and get Google Analytics. It is free, and if you're unable to install it on your website yourself, it's very easy. Don't let anyone try to tell you that they need half a day to install it. It's a line of code that gets installed. So first step, you are going to need Google Analytics. One of the quite often forgotten features of Google Analytics is goals, and what goals allows us to do is to do a couple of things, one of which is to get better data. So better data allows us to make more educated decisions on traffic generation, what to do on your website, if you're thinking about changing content or uploading new features or adding extra content or elements to your website, then goals allows your Google Analytics data to be more powerful because it helps break down the data into different sections. It helps marketers have a better understanding of what customers are doing on your website, so you can fix the leaky bucket. You don't want people coming to your website and then dropping off without knowing why. That's probably the most important thing, is it helps us work out why people are dropping off, where they're dropping off, and so on. And then the third reason why we use goals in Google Analytics is because it will help us drive better results and increase your return on investment, particularly if you are spending money on paid advertising such as Google Ads or social media, or if you're paying for SEO work, anything that you're doing as far as driving traffic or investing in your website or adding new features, then goals in Google Analytics will help you understand what is happening when that traffic lands on your website and make better decisions so that you can get a better result out of your spend. So just to give you a quick little example of what this information looks like, there's two screenshots on the presentation in front of you. One does not have goals configured and the other one does have goals configured. This information is taken from the acquisition section of Google Analytics, which explains where a lot of your traffic comes from. So in this particular example, we can see that the first example at the top there without the goals is getting most of its traffic from organic search, but we don't know what that traffic is doing. So there's all the goals say 0, whereas in the one at the bottom where we have goals configured, we know that paid search is delivering the most traffic, and they're also delivering the highest number of, the second highest number of goal completions. So a goal completion in this instance has been configured as an inquiry, so a new lead. And we can see there from those percentage numbers under the goal conversion rate that organic traffic converts twice as good as paid traffic. So if you're spending money on paid search, then you would want to make sure that for those 101 inquiries that were received from that traffic, that you were getting a valuable return on your spend. So that's the reason why we do it. And if you have an e-commerce website, then the information is even better because through the goal system in Google Analytics, it pulls in all the information from your store revenue. So you can now see the e-commerce conversion rate, the transactions, the number of transactions, and also the revenue from each source. So with all this information, you can customize Google Analytics data. So you could, for example, find out if males or females had the highest e-commerce conversion rate, or if you got more sales from an age group who's 25 to 35 versus 18 to 25. You could see revenue broken down by country, by city, by device, mobile versus desktop. So armed with this information, you can make much better decisions on what to do on your website, where to spend money, and how to get the best return. So when you're thinking about setting up your goals in Google Analytics, it's first a good idea to map out the website journey that a typical customer would take. So most people, well, most consumers would start their internet journey by searching for something, probably in Google or Bing or one of those, or possibly social media. The second stage is they're going to land somewhere. So they're going to land either on your homepage, or if you've configured a specific landing page on your website, then they're going to land there. So it's important to know where they are going to land. Once a prospect lands on your website, they're then going to evaluate that page. They're going to scroll up and down, and they're going to sort of look at the content that you've got. And this is where goals become really quite handy, because you can start seeing what people are doing when they land on your or when they're looking at your landing page, what they're doing. From there, particularly if it's an e-commerce store, they're going to make their pre-purchase selection. So what that means is that they are analyzing what they can see on the page. They're looking at the pictures, they're looking at the price, they're looking at the content, and then they're deciding in their brains whether or not they want to continue. Goals is a really handy way of tracking a pre-purchase selection, which I'll explain in a minute. And then finally, if that person then decides to commit to buy, then the final part of the journey would be a purchase decision, and then they would check out through the cart. The cart could also be configured with goals so that you can track drop off from cart to checkout to shipping to payment and so on. So for example, you might have a website that has a lot of people dropping off at the shipping section, and you would know that through your goals in Google Analytics, and then that would probably help you understand that maybe your shipping options weren't appropriate for that customer, or they weren't happy with the price. So goals will help you do things like that. So to use an example, I've used Bunnings here, and if I was in the market for a new lawnmower, I've typed in lawnmower Bunnings, and then I've landed on this page. So this is what I am presented with as a user, and if I was a marketer at Bunnings, then what I would be doing is configuring my goals for my evaluation. So these are two sections on the landing page that I might want to evaluate as a consumer. The first one on the top right there is whether or not I can get it delivered, or I need to go and pick it up from a nearby retailer. So for example, if I wanted it today, my evaluation goals would be working out whether or not it's available from a nearby store. So I would click and follow through that process. Alternatively, on the left here, if I was looking to sort of find out more information about this particular product, then the three tabs, product description, product details, and additional info, I might click those, and that would help me find out more about that product. And for example, if I clicked on the product details and then didn't like what I read and then abandoned this landing page and went to another website, then that would help the marketing people at Bunnings understand that they need to do a better job with the product information. So they're the kind of things that you might configure as an evaluation type goal. The next part of this process is whether or not there's a pre-purchase decision. So that means that potentially they're not yet ready to commit, and so you would want to configure a goal that was adding to a wish list. So I'm interested in this product. The product satisfies my interest, but I'm not quite ready to hit the add to cart button. So you might configure a goal as the add to wish list. And then finally, your final goal would be your add to cart button. And that would be what you would call purchase, or a purchase commitment as a goal, so that you know that, say, people who are males between 35 and 45 who are in New South Wales on a mobile device, saw this page, they liked what they saw, and then a percentage of those people then added to cart. That's the power of the data that we have. Richard, anything to add before I do an on-screen demo? How to set the goals up?
Only that, thanks. Only that you mentioned the final goal. What Gareth meant at that stage is the final goal for this page. It's not the final goal in the purchase process, because there are different stages of conversion. People can add to cart, but they may not end up closing the transaction. So there are various goals through the process as well. No, well done. Carry on.
Okay, good. Tick of approval so far. I've exceeded our goal of this webinar. So now I'm going to share my screen so I can show you how to set up a goal in Google Analytics. Richard, just check my screen for me that we can all see.
Hang on. Yep, all good.
Yeah, all good. Okay, so inside Google Analytics, if this is all too technical, then you can get a web developer or a marketing person to do it for you. But the first part of it is fairly straightforward if you have access to your Google Analytics. So once you've logged into Google Analytics and you've hit the admin down in the bottom left-hand side here, the cog, you'll be presented with 3 columns that look like this. All the action happens on the far right over here. And there's 2 sections. There's one labeled goals, and then there's one labeled e-commerce. Surprisingly, if you've got an e-commerce store, it's actually easier. So I'll show you how to do that one. You literally click e-commerce settings, and then you put the little toggle to on. And then if you want, you can enable enhanced e-commerce reporting. And what that does is it allows you to configure a sales funnel inside Google Analytics. I won't go into too much detail there, but I will just explain quickly that you might have a funnel step labeled cart, and then you might have a funnel step labeled shipping, and then you might have one labeled payment, and then you might have one labeled checkout. And they would be the 4 steps that you would want an e-commerce customer to go through. And as I was saying before, if you wanted to track whether or not people were happy with your shipping rates, then that's a really good way of doing it, because you can see the drop off in there. If you're using a popular e-commerce platform such as Shopify or WordPress with WooCommerce, then there are a lot of the integration is already done for you, and you can effectively just click a button inside Shopify and it'll do most of this for you. But there's a couple of different ways of doing it. However, in general, you can do it from Google Analytics here. If you don't have an e-commerce store, then it's a little bit more thought required, and you would configure goals. So inside goals, you'll be presented with a view that looks like this. You may find that you already have some goals that have been configured. If you don't, then you'll just have a red button that says new goal. You would hit new goal, and assuming you've spent some time thinking about what you're trying to track, you can then go about filling in the information. Personally, I think it's easier just to click the custom button as the first step rather than the template. It doesn't really make a whole heap of changes, but it's just easier. Hit custom, and then you want to label it really clearly. So for example, if I was Bunnings, I would want to track landing page evaluation, or I might say landing page pre-purchase, or I might say landing page commitment. So the better the label, and the label shows up in the analytics report, so it helps you understand what label is what. Goal ID, you can have up to 20 goals. Personally, I recommend you only have 4 or 5, because otherwise the data just becomes so much that it becomes confusing. So just don't try and track everything, just try and track the major things. For example, if someone sends you an inquiry, clicks your phone number, visits your store, like they click for an address, maybe if you have an ebook or a free emailing list or something like that, you might make that a goal. Start with those. That's a good start. The slightly tricky part is just the type of goal, and this is just how Google Analytics picks up what happens. The easiest one is called destination, and how this works is whether or not a page name changes. So for example, if I fill in an inquiry form and then the page changes and then you land on a thank you page, then that would be a destination that they got to. Or if you had a button that said download our free guide, and when you clicked on that button, it took you to another page that was labeled free guide, then that would be a page change, and then so the destination option would work fine. Duration, I don't personally find very useful, but if you were trying to gauge, say, interest in an article that you wrote, say you wrote an article or a white paper, then you might say the goal for that white paper's page would be 5 minutes or more, and so you could set a duration target for that particular page. If you were having a webinar video like we're doing, and you put the webinar video on a page, and then the webinar went for 20 minutes, then a goal would be getting people to watch the entire video, so you might make the duration, say, 20 minutes or more. If you then find that they're all only taking a minute, maybe we didn't do such a good job. Pages per session, again, I don't find this particularly handy, but if you were trying to work out how many pages someone looked at as a goal, because that's how you gauged their interest in your business or your product, then you could do that one, but I don't particularly find that useful. And then the last one is event. This one's a little bit complicated because it requires a web developer to insert some code on your website. So like the Bunnings example where we had product description, product details, those little tabs there, they didn't actually change the page itself. And so you would need to configure that as an event. And then there's a little bit of code that the developer would put into that website that would allow that event to be tracked. So it's slightly more complicated, but the easiest one is to use the destination. So if I hit that and then hit continue, you then just have to just decide on a couple of options. So for example, the destination page equals thank you.html. So if you had a website and you filled in the inquiry form, just do a little test. If you see the URL change, so it might be something like www.bunnings.com.au/thank you. So what Google Analytics is doing is it's looking for that page to be triggered. If you had a cart, you might be something like /cart or /checkout, so on and so on. That's what you do in there. I'm not going to explain and go into detail about values and funnels. Funnels is like what I explained before, which allows you to sort of track a 3 or 4 stage process. And value is if you wanted to put a dollar figure on things, like say you wanted to know if a lead was worth $100 or something like that, you could do that. But personally, I find that in the initial setup, just get a clear path set up. And then if you've set everything up, this isn't going to work for me because I haven't actually configured it with the website we're using. But if you hit the verify this goal, that just checks to make sure that Google Analytics can track that particular page, and it will see if there's any errors or anything that pops up. So assuming I did thanks.html like this, and then I hit verify, and then I hit save, and that's it. That's the process. There's nothing further to do. If you get an error, it's pretty good at telling you what the error was. You might have made a typo in the name, or that page didn't exist. So it should do a pretty good job there. And Richard, I'm just going to jump back to the presentation.
Okie doke.
So excuse my clicking around. So this little screen on the webinar now is just a handy one for reference of the different types of goals that I just very quickly went through. Just to recap, destination is a specific page or application screen. Duration is if you want to track certain amount of time on a page, or like if you had an intranet or a client login page, you could track how long people were engaged in there. If you had an application process, you could do that. Pages per session, again, I don't find this particularly handy, but it can be done. And then an event, sort of once you've got the initial goal set up, then you might decide that you want to track more specific events like sharing on social media, or playing a video, or clicking on an ad or something like that.
Or clicking on a button that doesn't actually
Or a
change the
button,
page,
yeah.
but you want to test and find out whether a particular button is being clicked on. And by whom.
Then there's a little bit of information here as well, which is handy reference if you want to do those type of event tracking, as Richard just mentioned. It is a bit technical, and you probably do need to have an understanding of code, or at least have a developer that can do it for you. And you need, these are the steps that you follow in order to do that. And so that's it. So it's just a couple of top tips for setting up goals. Keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate your reports with too many goals, because there'll be too much data for you to try and analyze, and it won't make a whole heap of sense. So, a handful is usually more than enough. Make sure they're really labeled clearly, so you know what they mean when reviewing Google Analytics. There's no point in having the data if you don't know what it is. And then always check the results. So check your reports regularly and consistently to see what the goal data is telling you, and then make decisions based on those numbers rather than gut. A lot of people tend to make decisions based on gut feel or personal opinions, when if you have some data that backs up that information, then you find you'll get a much better result from your marketing activities. So I believe that's it, unless anyone has any questions.
Yeah, open for questions.
Drum roll.
Actually,
scared
Gareth,
everybody off.
one thing that might be worth pointing out while people are coming in with questions is that is to mention about SMART goals. Google's got this thing about SMART goals, and SMART goals are useful for when you tie your Google ads into your Google Analytics. But that's another story. So someone's asked, what if the thank you page site is after the PayPal step?
Okay, do you want me to answer that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so assuming that is an e-commerce site where that is running, then Google Analytics does a pretty good job of understanding what payments are and not. So my first recommendation would be to try the e-commerce settings and see if it picks up the PayPal redirect. Because what typically happens is it will take the user off to PayPal, and then when they've completed their transaction in PayPal, they then usually end up back at the website on a thank you page. And so if I've understood your question correctly, then that thank you page can then still be picked up by Google Analytics. Where your question potentially causes a problem is if they finish their website journey and then they don't come back to the website. However, you can get around that with the event tracking by making the button, which is Pay with PayPal, the event. So them clicking the button would be the final step of your goal that you would track. Hopefully that answered your question correctly.
Are there any other questions? Okay, so at this point, I will just remind people that if you do want to have a session, and this is not part of a sales pitch, this is part of a helpful pitch, that if you do want to schedule a chat with Gareth to get some help with your own goals, that you can click on the button to access his calendar, and there's no charge for that at all for people who are attending the webinar. Using events, can I track if people are clicking on different tabs on the page? Gareth?
Yes. That would be like the Bunnings example. I will quickly pull that up in here. So where you've got product categories, product details, and additional info, using events, you would track each one of those as a using events, you would track each one of those as a click. So anything that is a click that doesn't actually change it doesn't reload the page, or the URL doesn't change, then you can use events to track that.
Which is really handy to figure out which tabs of information people are choosing to look at and which ones they're not choosing to look at. And also, when you start drilling back, you can see who was choosing to look at what tab of information. And that's a really good way of fine-tuning the the type of content that you're putting out to assist people in their sales process. The next one is in approximately 2 weeks' time, and this is about Google Shopping. Google Shopping is really taking off. Google loves it because they make some money, and a lot of customers use it. And for e-commerce merchants, people have people are trying to sell online need to work out, whether it is something you want to be part of or not. On the 14th of November, we've got a webinar called "The Secret Ingredient of a Successful Brand." And this one is going to be run with a special guest presenter called Michelle Hogan. Michelle is a brand specialist based in Melbourne. She writes for Smart Company. Some people will have probably read a lot of her material. She's written various books, and she's coming on board as a guest presenter for that particular webinar, The Secret Ingredient of a Successful Brand. On the 26th of November, Smart E-Commerce Strategies for 2020. That is really something to help people understand what is not just on the horizon, but what is really happening tomorrow. And one that we haven't scheduled, but we're currently planning, is on ransomware. And ransomware is just there's a whole lot of bad stuff going on, and a lot of people getting caught by it. And so we're going to be running a webinar on that, and we're going to be scheduling that one sometime relatively soon. If you've got any other suggestions of topics you'd like to see covered, please let us know. We are really trying to make these sessions valuable and useful for you in topics that are important, and so they're the ones that are coming up. So now that's the wrap. If you want any more help, please get in touch. And Gareth, thanks very much for everyone for coming. Gareth, over to you.
Yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. Keep it concise.
Okay, thanks guys. All the best. See you.
Bye.